The myth, the legend, it is drag superstar, Cheddar Gorgeous! Come on, don't be so coy. Who, unlike lesser drag artists, bothered to wear heels today. And finally, another person who I've also known for a very long time, the wonderful Maurice Naggington. Hello, Maurice. Maurice is a consultant in HIV and sexual health and a researcher at the University of Manchester whose works focus on the social culture and ethical dimensions of gay men's sexual cultures. Say that 5 times fast. He's the author of the book The Moral Lessons of Chems, which is available to download for free, so it's not even a money spinner for him today. His research has informed practitioner and policy-led conversations, contributes to harm reduction guidance, and above and beyond. I didn't say anything particular about you, Shazza, but then I assume that's because your name precedes itself, doesn't it, really? You are a member of the wonderful village here in Manchester, a true Manchester queen, working very hard, week in, week out, but also you are going to be speaking to us today about your personal experiences of chemsex. And I just wanted to give this brief moment, which is why I delayed the introduction to you, to say that this is actually Shazza's 10-year anniversary of being sober. We're going to hear about your story in a little while, but I thought first I would just pass over to Paul, who's working very practically in this area, and I sometimes need a practical hand with things when it comes to understanding topics. In terms of chemsex, what is it we are talking about? And I mean that by, obviously there are probably broader definitions you might think of as chemsex, but what are we talking about? How does that relate to maybe what the law and services see as chemsex, quote unquote?
It's a really important question because chemsex from one person to the next isn't necessarily the same. You know, there's lots of variations on kind of chemsex, lots of commonalities as well. The substances used are kind of people that participate in chemsex. So I want to say the definition of chemsex that we work with is kind of men having sex with men. Using the 3 substances, crystal meth, G, or a mix of an MCAT. You know, and any of those kind of substances used on their own are going to cause problems. Lots of kind of sexual activity, as you've heard earlier today, is going to cause problems as well. And need kind of managing.
And so, you as an organisation, do you work primarily with those drugs, or and there's kind of very little scope to work outside? And is that the same in the law? Is there a law around what is defined as chemsex?
I'm not sure if there is a law. There may kind of be a law. I mean, lots of kind of discussions outside there.
Policy is a better word. Law sounds very like.
Yeah. I think it's becoming increasingly in the conversations at the right level to maybe define policies and stuff, but I'm not sure, even in Manchester, I'm not sure we're even there yet. Just going back to something you said at the beginning in the introduction, when I first came on board in this role as a reach practitioner, I was kind of identified as a specialist substance misuse practitioner. As the kind of my experience has evolved, it's not sort of just substance misuse. You know, Chems is not just substance misuse. The problems that come from Chems aren't just to do with the substances at all. I would say maybe that's one kind of relatively small proportion of it. You know, there is problems obviously coming from substance misuse. So my role is kind of described as a specialist practitioner today, and even kind of a chemsex specialist practitioner because of the amount of people that are coming through the clinics across Manchester.
No, I know that I can see you nod your head, Maurice, because I know that this links very, very succinctly into your work. So touching upon that idea of what is it around and behind chems and what else is going on and those other energies, but also, I think we have a perception that chemsex is this new thing, right? It's been around for like 10, 15 years, right? And like it's come over and it's involved Tina and G and it's this new phenomenon. And I suspect that you might have something to say about that, Maurice.
You're so clever. So chemsex in its sort of current form, the drugs that there have been, has been around since at least the 1960s. The methamphetamine was kind of started to circulate in Western context since about the 50s, and then gay men definitely have picked up by the 60s, and there's some films that represent that. But then I think what we have seen in the past 10, 15 years is a real change in the way gay men were able to socialise, particularly in cities like London, to some extent in cities like Manchester, where the spaces became less available. I mean, I was down in Vauxhall a month ago, and those spaces where gay men used to socialise had gone. You know, you've got the American embassy there, which has very much gentrified the area, and it was not difficult to go and have sex on Chems there. And there was also kind of infrastructure of trains to be able to bring people in, take people back out, and it was obviously a real kind of central node for that. But then there was also kind of inflections of class dynamics of who could afford to host, who couldn't afford to host. And then I think you start getting into sort of what Paul was saying, that some of the problems associated with Chems are not just the drugs themselves, but also then people's ability to access support, their ability to afford psychosexual care, and all those sorts of things, and poverty as well, which we've just seen grow massively in the UK in the past 5-10 years. And a close friend of mine who had problems with chemsex said, well, actually, I didn't have mental health problems, I was just poor. And it's a slight joke and a slight simplification, but there's a lot of truth in that as well.
Totally. Shazza, I'm just gonna, so I know your story really well. Like, we've known each other for quite a long time, like 30, 40 years. I'm the younger one. But I think would you be up for just talking to the audience about your experiences? Like, so I feel like it's a story that I know, but they would benefit from knowing too.
My story with the village, it started in 2005. I came out as normal, got in a relationship, and I was fine. And I was 16 at that point in 2005. But it took until I was about 23 and 24, and I got into a different crowd. I had more money in my back pocket, so I was able to access more things. I was a bit more bored as well. And yeah, I just fell in with a wrong crowd, and like you said, it was MCAT, it was G, and it was crystal meth. The crystal meth didn't come in for me till a bit later. It was very expensive 10 years ago. But yeah, I was in with this crowd. Some of them were amazing people. Like, it's easy just to think that they were just junkies, but they weren't. In 2014, in November, on Whitworth Street, my partner at the time, he was 22 years of age, and he died in my arms from a drug overdose. And since he died, 8 of my group also died, and they were all under the age of 30. 3 of them were straight women, so it's not just gay men that it's just happening to. It's not just chemsex that's happening. There is sessions going on, and these sessions are going on for days and days and days, and that's when it starts getting dangerous and people aren't sleeping and starting to have psychosis. It got to 10 years ago today, and I went home and I found out my little sister was pregnant, and she's crazy, and I thought, I have to see how this turns out, because there's no way she
must be really crazy if you're calling her crazy.
I just didn't see how she was going to have a baby. She hated children, and yeah, I stuck with it. I watched all the pregnancy, and we lived together and everything, and I'm here now, like 10 years later, and that kid is now 9, and now I'm here speaking about this. It's the best decision I ever made, honestly. Drag's been in my life for about 6 years, but part of me getting clean, I found Drag Race on Netflix. So that was my cold turkey programme, and yeah.
This has been a real low for Drag Race to bring you back up, do you know what I mean?
Well, there's a message that they say at the end of every single episode. It was, if you can't love yourself, how are you going to love somebody else? and that really stuck with me. And I wanted to do drag for years and years, but there was just a shame to it for me, I think. And yeah, when I started to get into drag, it was like I definitely want to get this message out there and this story, because it is important. I don't like being here 10 years later and still hearing that young people are dying. And especially now it's ketamine that seems to be the dangerous one, doesn't it?
Thank you.
So the logical next step from this conversation is around harm reduction, but I want to linger a little bit on why, right? And I think we touched on it slightly over here. We are all really aware of the dangers involved with some of the substances that people take in chemsex parties, right? So why? Let's think more through that. Why do you feel? And anyone can start. I feel like you all have something to say around why.
When you say why, what specifically?
I mean, why take the risk?
Yeah. Why do you take risk?
If I was to be the devil's advocate, prudish one in the room.
Yeah, absolutely.
For me, one of the things that they always say to me trying to get off drugs is the people that you surround yourself with. And for me, some of them people were just brilliant to me. It's like I found my tribe. So that was a big reason why, is I always wanted to be around them, and that's why I stayed for days and days, is because they were my type of people. We've all been through similar stories, we've all had to come out and all that stuff, and for me that was a big reason why. And with regards to the sex stuff, for me, at being young, sometimes it was I was just looking for drugs or something, and a chemsex party was the only way that you could get drugs, is by attending one of them. So it wasn't even necessarily about drugs, it was getting a hit.
I think there's an academic, Ford Hickson, who's done loads and loads of research about sexual health and sexual well-being for decades, and his work's well worth reading. And I read one of his papers a few years ago when I was writing his book, and he talks about chemsex as edge work, and so sort of the living on the slight edge of experience. And for me, that kind of places it within a lot of other experiences that we enjoy in life. So myself, for example, I enjoy going on long solo bike rides. I have nearly fallen down a cliff a couple of times.
Literal edge work.
Literal edge work. But, and like my mother sort of worries when I go on these bike rides, she's really happy when I'm back. But part of that is enjoyment. And like, I am the child of parents who met literally flinging themselves off cliffs in gliders. So like, there is an element of risk that is alluring to human experience. And so yes, there are risks to chemsex, and I think one of our concerns has to be, well, how do we as a community, and then also how do we make demands to wider society to kind of make sure that those risks don't result in tragedy, actually.
Thank you. Why? So yeah, there's I've seen many people participate in Chems over the years that I've been kind of delivering the role, and one of the kind of common themes comes up quite regularly is that it's part and parcel of being in the gay community is being involved in Chems related activities. Another kind of common theme is that people feel that they can't kind of be in touch with their sexuality, they can't be in touch with their sexual identity, and therefore who they are. And then they enter this arena of chemsex, and it's kind of exactly who they are. They need people that they're kind of identifying with, connecting with, community, that kind of sexual expression. Obviously when you put the substances in play there, then things become a little bit kind of warped and people lose the way. And I guess that's when they kind of arrive at a sexual health clinic and like kind of have contact with myself.
I feel as well there's like in those substances a loss of all the shame we've been talking about as well, right? It's a way of breaking down those kind of structures that we have in our mind. But thinking about your work, Maurice, but I always feel that, and I don't want to focus too much on a gay man's perspective here, and I actually think what I'm about to say, actually a lot of women will really resonate with this, particularly a lot of trans people will definitely resonate with this. I feel that as a gay male, that there's almost like this bunch of stuff that you can never really succeed at being a man in. Do you know what I mean? Like, I'm never going to find value in, like, being a dad. That's not the same as a daddy. I'm never necessarily going to be that image of masculinity, although, you know, right price. This wasn't meant to be, this was meant to be a serious point I was trying to make. But I think there are very few areas where we're kind of allowed to excel as men, and yet in the gay community, there's one thing that we have learned it's fine for us to excel at, and that's fucking. Right? And so you have this space that you're allowed to find value in yourself, I think, sometimes. And I think women as well, like when they lose that inhibition, women are told they're not allowed to do so much. Like they grow up not, you know, every step a woman takes is wrong. You know, she's either too assertive or too demure, she's either too much of a slut or she's too much of a prude. You know, and so when you find a space in which it's just, oh, fuck it. Here you can be whatever you want, here you can fly. And I wonder how much of that is about this space as a space of real liberation, and how much of that is about the fact that we can't excel anywhere else because of who we love, you know?
It's a good point. I agree. I'm a heterosexual man.
It's all right, we welcome
coming into this role, you know, it was a real consideration. I felt, you know, like an imposter and stuff, but was made to feel very welcome in people's lives. And soon got over that, I was able to see the kind of benefits of being a heterosexual man, possibly in these kind of situations, to be more objective about where the risks are and how to approach certain situations. So I have no qualms in saying I'm a heterosexual man working in not a heterosexual world. So, you know, to kind of flip, I guess, in some ways what you're saying, but you're absolutely right. You know, some of the kind of things that people encounter are just against who they are all the time. You know, when we kind of help people stabilise from the substance use and the kind of really dangerous behaviours around chemsex, we start seeing all that stuff, and that's where I developed kind of connections with other services in Manchester to be able to support people around those more specialist areas.
I think one of my reflections would be kind of this idea of excelling. And I completely get what you're saying, that maybe there's not many spaces where you can be exceptional as a gay man. But also there's sometimes this sort of pressure of competition within that setting, and to kind of harder, faster, better, stronger, you know, to quote that one. But I think there's a real tension there between ideas of going further, doing more, having more, you know, having sort of more intense experiences, versus maybe kind of that the other side of sex, which is about sensuality, which is about connection. And I think that's kind of one of my real concerns about how we think what the experience of chemsex is for people. Are you experiencing connection, or are you just feeling this desire for like obliteration, maybe, and addiction, and an inability to kind of step away from that compulsion to compete?
And maybe it's not one or the other as well.
Yeah,
I think
totally.
one of the things that strikes me about what you said, Chems, and it came up in when we did research for On It, the word brotherhood came up so much, like with everyone. So we talked to people for whom chemsex had been an issue and something they wanted to step back from in life, and we also talked to people who were still actively involved in chemsex and felt it didn't impact their lives. And this word came up, the idea of finding a community. Did you feel like that wasn't possible to find elsewhere, or was it just so good where you found it?
I don't know, I was brought up in Wythenshawe, which is South Manchester. Chems was filmed there, that's how awful it is. It's improved a lot over the last few years, it has. So I was brought up there wasn't really anything gay there at all. I didn't even really know what gay was until I came to the village. But yeah, that particular community, yeah, it was just my tribe. I just felt like definitely like I'd found them, but before that, I never really found like a clique or a group of people or anything like that. It was just this particular group I just was attached to, and then just things progressed with regards to like what drugs we were taking and stuff. I think G, that was the main one that sort of let your inhibitions go to even change people's personalities, that one.
And so let's talk a little bit more about these different drugs involved. So we've got crystal meth, we've got GHB, G, and we've also got MCAT, and now also it seems ketamine as well is coming in. I don't know if that's something that services are considering. Does anybody, I mean, I don't have any experience, but would anybody be willing to describe each of those drugs and what impact they have and how they make you feel?
I can speak from experience. So G, that was in liquid form, and so that one you'd have to take it with a drink or else it's going to burn you because it's corrosive. It was literally known as alloy cleaner. I don't know if that's true, I never actually figured it out, but that's what, is it?
You didn't give
it a try.
No, I didn't try cleaning alloys, but it definitely like burnt my skin. So that one, it's kind of like, well, they used to call it like liquid ecstasy, so you're on a level where you feel great and then all of a sudden it's like your brain can switch off because there's too much like gammas in your brain which are already there, but now you're overdosed on it, which is switching it off, which is what the G stands for, and it is the gamma. Yes, that one is very, very dangerous, G, and that's what a lot of people have died from. The ketamine is a psychedelic drug that will send you into hallucinations. It's definitely changed from before 2014 to what it was around about 2016 when I noticed there was a difference in it then. And I'd been on the village about 10 years by then. I'd never known anyone to die from ketamine. And now we've had the Vivian sadly last year. I had a friend called Natalie Schmitz who passed away last year, and also we had Chandler from Friends, didn't we? And I'd never heard of it happening to anybody. Crystal meth makes you crazy. I tried to blow up someone's van on that. That was on my... They insulted me, so I tried to light the van on fire, but that was my last sesh though. I feel like I went too far there.
Did you succeed in blowing up the van?
No, it was pissing it down and I only had matches.
I have to question whether you went too far then.
And what was the other G? Oh, MCAT. So MCAT, my experience with that was actually a chemsex session. It was through Grindr, and I was just looking for somewhere, and I found these guys that were doing MCAT, and they said to me, "We're actually slamming it, do you mind?" I'd never heard of that term before, and for me, what I thought that was when you put it in a Rizzler, you eat it, and that was it. But that's bombing. But yeah, that's why I thought slamming was. I was like, yeah, go for it, it's fine. And then I got there, already on G, I witnessed it happening in front of me, and I was like, go for it. But it was, sorry, that was injecting, they were injecting MCAT, so I was just like, go for it. And I feel like it was definitely the G that made me more willing to do that, because like for years and years that was disgusting to me. My older brother sister's dad was a heroin addict, and he still is for over 30 years, I don't know how he's alive. But yeah, so injecting drugs was something I thought I would never do, but being in that situation on G already, it made me a lot more like, go for it. Yeah, but that's my description of my experiences of each of the different ones.
And what about if we're thinking, and I think this is where it becomes hard, right? Because if we start to think about risk, and you've described a scenario there where you've got G in your system, you've got MK in your system, like I think it's very hard to pull out risks from specific substances, which is also kind of, I also get this little kind of thing when we think around ketamine and the dangers of ketamine, because one of the things, and somebody might need to correct me on this science here, but my understanding is that G is one of those strange drugs that leaves your system sometimes, and so it's impossible to detect after death, right? So is there anyone who's up for talking about the specific risks of the drugs that we're talking about?
Yeah, I guess this is my area, you know. MCAT, I mean, let's park ketamine up a minute. Ketamine's a separate kind of thing, but we'll come back to that because it is significant over the last kind of 6 months to a year. There's an increasing number of death deaths recorded from kind of ketamine use, and I'm not sure they're associated so much in those instances with chemsex situations, but there's another conversation, so we'll come back to that. Crystal meth is a stimulant. It's what I refer to as the potent stimulant. It can last between 4 and 12 hours. You can smoke it as you would crack cocaine, you can inject it or slam it as it's referred to in a chemsex situation, or you can boot a bump it as well, which is kind of inserted into the anal passage. Crystal meth is problematic on one level because you might not take any fluids or sleep anything over a 2 or 3 day period, and I kind of challenge anyone in this room not to drink, not to eat, and not to take on kind of fuel for 3 days and not have some kind of negative psychological fallout from it. And I see it time and time again, and people are saying, oh, it's crystal meth, it's crystal meth. My instant advice and guidance is go and get some sleep. When you get some sleep, we can start talking about it. So there is a heavy psychological impact associated with crystal meth use on its own. I'm not surprised to hear about that kind of story where things went a bit crazy. I hear those kind of things all the time. G is another beast, and it is absolutely a beast. You know, if you do not manage G properly, the dosing, the kind of who's dosing you, how you're kind of taking it on board, how you're purchasing it, who the dealer is, all that kind of stuff. You're not necessarily going to be aware of what you're getting and how much you're taking. So if you're not familiar with it, the dosing recommendation, if I can call it that, is kind of 0.7 millilitres to 1.3, and that's the kind of advised guidance we give around dosing. And people are taking a hell of a lot more. People aren't, you know, they're off their heads. People are off their heads, and they're trying to dose and they're trying to manage their doses. So they don't get it right. You know, the overdose window from optimum high on G to overdose, the margin, sorry, to overdose is really short. If not one of the shortest margins on any of the illicit substances that we kind of work with. So people go over quite regularly, and that go over in a chemsex situation raises all kinds of problems, as you can imagine, you know. And one of them, which is going to be discussed later, is the kind of problem around consent. And you know, there's a high rate of people kind of presenting with, I don't know if I've perpetrated a sexual assault or if I've been sexually assaulted, because they've been in and out of that kind of conscious state under the influence of G. MCAT is something, when I first came on board 5 years ago, was the stimulant use, or referred to as the stimulant use. And the reason, if you're not familiar, the stimulant use in a chemsex situation is so you can participate in sexual activities for long periods of time with many people. So it's not like that anymore. You touched on it when you were kind of participating in it. Crystal meth, when I came on board 5 years ago, over 5 years ago, was 160 to 180 pound a gram. These days you can get it for 20 to 40 quid. You know, it's so much more readily available and so much more accessible. So these days, the stimulant and the downer are crystal meth and G.
So what specifically, and like I'm not trying to be the downer in the room here, do invite me to your parties in the future, guys. But what specifically, and I'm thinking on, you mentioned the idea of G being like a beast, what is it doing to your body, and what, because I'm referring back really to what Kath was thinking around in actually understanding the science of what's going on. What are the risks of GHB and what could be its potential effects and how like?
There's something you touched on about how it's not present in kind of tracing on death. In London, my understanding is there's lots of recorded deaths from G use or G overdose. In Manchester, there's not, because we're not kind of skilled enough or familiar enough to look for it at that point. The people that are finding these death situations aren't familiar with some of the paraphernalia that might be lying around, some of the kind of characteristics of that kind of situation, enough to say we need to consider this. So my understanding is that the body produces G on death, so that's a complicating kind of feature. The other thing is that it can be specifically traced if you look for it specifically, but if you're not looking for it specifically, then you're going to miss it, and that's the kind of point we made there. The ongoing use of G, and what I mean there is the weekend use from Friday to Sunday, will cause some kind of fallout. You will need some recovery period from it. It's rare that people will just be using G on the weekend. They'll usually be using crystal meth because of the kind of activities involved in chemsex situation. I want the high, I want to engage in research, I want the low to chill out, ready for building my energy up again to participate in the energetic activities. So it's hard to define whether somebody at that point of their journey with G is having a fallout from G. Further down the line, people become really dependent on G because it's heavily addictive. It's akin to the addictive quality is akin to somebody drinking alcohol for many years, and the withdrawal management of it is required similar to someone drinking alcohol for many years. Usually the fallout that I see from those kind of situations that happen from Friday to Monday is from crystal meth use. I say that laughing because it's not, it's the fact that you haven't slept, you haven't eaten, and you haven't drank anything. So we talk about harm minimisation, that's exactly where I'm at, trying to get people to kind of put in place some activities that are going to allow them to hydrate, allow them to rest, and allow them to cool.
I very much want to follow on from that comment actually. Like all the drugs we just listed are used or very close analogues of them are used in other like situations. So the amphetamines, lots of ADHD medications based around that. G used to be a treatment for narcolepsy. MCAT is extremely closely related to CAT, which is a drug traditionally used in kind of northeastern Africa, particularly Ethiopia. These are drugs that are used in social situations, my point being, where people have ready access to open and honest discussions with either community members or professionals. And I think one of the difficulties we have is the shame and stigma and silence around chemsex, where if you're just relying on your own, your own kind of compass, which is probably a little bit wonky if you haven't slept at least for one day, then it's really difficult. But one of the things that in my research, I was interviewing 20 people for 2.5 years repeatedly, and almost all the participants said to me, "You're the only person I've spoken to at length about this," which was quite shocking actually. And people did find that really useful. I think there is a harm reduction that we can be doing by literally talking to each other and allowing that ability to reflect with each other kind of early on or even in the moment, and finding people who we trust that we can say, look, I am going to be going out tonight, this weekend, can people check in on me? And that's maybe quite a difficult thing to say or feel, because you sort of feel you can trust the people you're doing it with, but, can I tell my friends I'm going to go out on a chemsex session? So I think those are some of the things that, I would want to contribute. The social setting of the way we use the drugs is a lot of the way the harms end up escalating.
You don't want to do something? Well, I'm shocked.
Remind me of the question.
Well, I think we've moved on to harm reduction, and you may have a different perspective on this than everybody else. Do you feel there are ways that harm can be reduced, and in what instances do you think that's harder?
It definitely had effects on my body, and it's still even got effects now. One of the effects it's definitely had is on my jaw. It just clicks all the time, so can't really be snogging people. I don't know if you'll be able to hear it on the mic, shall I try? So that's an effect after it.
Don't go to the cinema with Shazza if she's in the back row. You'll get no peace.
I got tasered as well in psychosis, which, that was an experience. So these things that happened. I spent 5 weeks in hospital as well because my bowel nearly burst. That was like the middle of, I don't know how to describe it, the middle of like my time on drugs. I spent a long period in hospital. I was in and out of hospital, and I've not even been in a hospital for 10 years, so it's definitely the drugs that did all that to me, because it shows, doesn't it? Because since I've got clean, I've never had to see a doctor or anything. So
It feels like such a hard thing to find a balance around, right? In terms of, and it's back to this idea of, for me, personal freedom and the idea of my body, my choice, all of those things that are so critically important to us as queer people. And I think, how do we balance that with our desires, particularly for people who, so I've got friends who regularly take GHB, say regularly, like maybe once a month, you know, once every 2 months. They have they hold down a job, they lead a happy and healthy life otherwise. I mean, it's a bit irritating, but and obviously they are very different Chems users to a community that might be experiencing other things, may have gone into a particular pattern of use that influences the kind of mental and physical harm and increases mental and physical harm. How do we balance that idea of our personal desires and our personal right to choose with our commitment to a community, with our sense of looking after ourselves, with providing services? Because obviously not everybody who uses Chems has the same experience as you. What do you feel?
You're kind of essentially asking how we say it's okay to use substances, and I think that's a really wider discussion, and we're always kind of hearing things about, cannabis is going to legalise, there's kind of safe spaces to use substances and stuff like that. I'm really not sure how that could fit into a Chems situation, and that's a really good point to kind of make, really, and really get into that discussion about how you would make it. And just going back to something you kind of pointed out there, not everybody participating in chemsex-related activities is in a real difficult situation or having problems from it. Some people do kind of participate really healthy, really kind of safely, and have a really good kind of connection with it. And I'm kind of blinded to that in my realm in some ways, because the community of chemsex participants I encounter are the people that are having problems with it, although there's a couple of people that might come into the clinics and might just want a discussion, and once they've had that discussion they realise, actually I haven't got a problem, I just believed I had to come and see you because people were telling me I had a problem with it, and they haven't. They're managing it really well, and good for them. There's no need to kind of demonise their situation. Go and play safely. I've learned something from your situation, and I'm going to kind of use that to be able to advise and guide other people that are further down the road with problems.
Just very briefly, sort of did allude to like the exteriority of like chemsex people, like so you can go to friends who maybe aren't doing chemsex. Also, I think there's maybe a responsibility to the people we're having chemsex with, to if you've spent like a Friday or Saturday night with someone, message them on the Monday or the Tuesday and like see how they are. And I mean, my background's in nursing, so I find that really quite an easy, natural thing to do. But there are definitely a couple of friends where they haven't been all right, and then I've had a conversation like, well, there's this charity or that charity you can go to. And so I think we do also have a responsibility to each other, to check in with each other, and point each other to support and care where we can. And you're not always in a position to support and care. I don't think that's like an obligation I want to put on people. But like if you feel okay, but also sometimes just not feeling okay and not feeling okay with someone else kind of takes the sort of pressure off that. But I don't think
I'm just
okay.
I wonder as well whether there's, when we think about Chems, you've identified the kind of 3 key drugs, which to me seem like radically different substances. And I think there's a little bit of a black box around that when we talk about substances. We do it all the time with drugs and alcohol. And I think there's one good point to be made around the fact of, do you know what, I love weed. Medicinal, of course. It's a prescription, and it's not my prescription. But I guess it was someone's prescription somewhere down the line, certainly NHS quality. But, I've had friends for who have had cannabis-induced psychosis. And who have really struggled getting off. And so any drug can be a problem, like you say, any drug can be a problem. Alcohol can be a problem, all these things that are legal, they can be a problem. I love poppers, I am a poppers slut. I take them whether I'm topping, I take them whether I'm botching, I don't care. And that is we were having a discussion about poppers earlier and the impact that has on the brain, right? This has a measured impact on our brain's capacity to make decisions, but also to function over a longer period of time. But it feels to me like there are certain substances, and if I'm fixating particularly on G, we're talking about something, as you say in the dosing, that literally can lead to an accidental death very easily, or be weaponized, right? And I just wonder about that. Why we lump together our substances instead of talking about the complexities of each one? Because somebody might be like, oh, I've been doing chemsex for years, and some people completely can use G safely because they're regulated. But for me, I almost worry, and I become a bit like Kath Ogie, in terms of if we have to simplify the discussion that chems can be safe, we don't recognise the specific risks of specific substances and exactly how grave those consequences could be sometimes. I don't know. Do you guys have? And I'm really up for a counter on that in terms of, because like I do have friends who use G, you know, who I have these conversations with.
I think specifically with G, a lot of the deaths that I've heard of over the years had a lot to do with vodka, as people were drinking. And we've not actually, I don't think anyone's mentioned that the other name for G is date rape. So people are using that spike and people are not realising how much that person's actually had to drink throughout the night. And then that's how people are overdosing as well, because, yeah, like you said, people are using it to weaponise.
I'm really conscious that I want to go to questions. We haven't got very long for questions, so if people could raise their arms if they've got one. We've got loads of questions, folks. Sorry, it's going to eat into the lunch. I'll come over here to go first question over here.
Hi, so my question's about detox. So many years ago, myself and Duncan Craig over here used to work in harm reduction.
Cheddar Gorgeous hasn't mentioned it once. I can tell you people, you know, you make that.
I thought I used it for something else.
And if I remember rightly, Duncan, correct me if I'm wrong, you had a client who needed a detox.
First in the country.
Yeah, and was there one bed in the whole country for
No,
a
we had
detox?
no bed.
There was no beds.
But what we had to do, we had to invent a bed and also have an ICU bed because we didn't have the protocol in place to ensure that we could do it safely.
Yeah. So my question is, has that improved, and how do people actually access detox and rehab?
Yeah, it's really great question, and one of my real kind of battles and challenges in trying to get people needing tier 4 services, which is detox and rehab, the right kind of pathway into local authority funded specialist situations. So what I've not talked about, and conscious of time, what I've not talked about is the high-end dependency on G and the kind of the physical, psychological impact of that. We're talking about people highly dependent on G, living chaotic lives, maybe taking crystal meth and even crack cocaine as well, you know, being found in streets and kind of being picked up by ambulance service. So in Manchester, the ambulance service is pretty familiar, not fully, they can do better, pretty familiar on how to kind of respond to those situations. And then when you get them to MRI, for example, who are really good again at responding to a G overdose or G withdrawal, then they would treat that kind of individual on that national guidance that's in place that hardly anybody knows about. You know, it's just ridiculous. But anyway, that's where we're at. So that's one of my battles. And then we look at how people can progress into tier 4 services there. And it's Chapman Barker Unit, you know, they're the specialist service. There are other services around the country that will entertain taking on board someone on a G dependency of around about 20 to 30 mil, but they will not go beyond that because they know there's a whole raft of complications associated with it. So it's a battle. I've got people coming to me through the clinics that have got plenty of money because this isn't a situation that is just kind of associated with you know, a usual drug and alcohol cohort in society. It comes from a wide, broad range of kind of people. So some people come to money and say, I've got this money, I need to go to detox and rehab. And I'm like, okay, that's really good, you've got the money. It enables us to look at other options. but we still need to do the preparation work. We need to get you to a right dosage so that the facility are going to be able to manage whatever falls out. So a couple of people that I supported through Chapman Barker unit have had to be put on under a section 2, which means you can't keep themselves safe for the dangers of others for 2 or 3 days at a time, and then the kind of support from Chapman Barker unit kicks in and they level out. But those 2 periods, these 2 people over those periods had no recollection of that. You know, due withdrawal for a heavily dependent user is absolutely massive. Sometimes going through A&E, they might need intubated, put into an induced coma for a couple of weeks till their stats kind of stabilise, until it can be managed while they're conscious.
I wondered if I could talk about some of the things that are leading to Chems in our community. And what I'm going to say, partly as a gay man, I know it's worse if you're a queer man of colour, a trans community, but it is experienced by heterosexuals as well. I think there's a few things. There's a real body dysmorphia in the community and an expectation about how you present. I think that leads to this. There's an issue of loneliness in the community, and both of those things are exaggerated by age and an ageing gay community, a lot of which we're living with is survivor guilt from the AIDS crisis. I think there's, I'm afraid you talked about we're good at sex. Not everyone is, and the pressure to be good at sex and when sex fails. The hookup culture, the difference between shagging a random and actually shagging somebody you've been on 3 dates with and you like is a very different pressure. And I had a 3rd date with somebody this week and we got to that stage and it wasn't great, and I still feel really bad about it 3 days later, and I feel really bad for them and I feel for me, and I think that's a really hard thing that we aren't able to talk about. And I think there's an issue about HIV with this. We think, I run the Terence Higgins Trust, which is a genuine honour, and we think the statistics seem to be about 40% of gay men living with HIV have done Chems at some point. And I'm not living with HIV, and this is not my experience, but I listen to testimonies very often. And speaking to people who say, it's the first time I can have sex again after my diagnosis without thinking or worrying I'm going to pass on the virus or that I'm returning to the place where I got the virus. And one of the things that we live with the stigma is 9 out of 10 people living with HIV know that if they take their medication, they can't pass it on. What Darren earlier referred to as U equals U. Only 6 out of 10 believe it. And that's where that stigma exists. And for that group of people, Chems is the best sex they've had since their diagnosis. And I think that's a really big thing. The other thing, and I had the opportunity to meet the Prime Minister last week to talk about some of these issues, and I raised it with him. I have a friend who meets somebody on a Thursday or Friday night, and he uses a Sharpie to write on his back and on his torso, "If asleep, don't fuck." And the bit that I find you want to be non-judgmental in this space, and we provide a service called chemsex.co.uk. 1,500 people have done a self-assessment tool. Do I spend too much time on Grindr, too little? Am I spending too much drugs? And it gives you back your answers. There's no judgment at all. We just repeat back to people what they do. But you sit there going, how could you knowingly go into, for a weekend, a space in which the chance that you will get raped is so high you go to your friend that you write on them, "If asleep, don't fuck." And I think that just is a very sobering element to all of this, that there's a big lead into it, and then there's what is happening, and that because these issues are so complex, and they come so close to our own experiences, it's often easier to not talk about them.
Are you telling me to stop? No. Good. Yeah, we're carrying on, aren't we? Good.
Thank you very much. Hi, I'm Ed. I'm from Survivors UK. We're a sexual violence service based down in the south. Mainly, we're a nationwide service, but most of our clients are in London. I co-founded the Surviving Chemsex group with our organisation about 5 years ago, and so have kind of been on this sort of journey of understanding the ins and outs and the nature of the issue. And today, I just want to thank you guys, all of you, and Cheddar as well, for starting the conversation with the why. Because I think that I've been involved in lots of conversations about Chems over the years, and the focus is always stolen by the drug use, by the potential for sexual violence, which of course needs to be discussed. But it's the focus is hardly ever on the why, the social isolation, the discrimination, the sense of community, all of these things that always come up in our conversations in our groups. One of the most interesting things that I have heard from a client when we've been talking about why Chems was this sense of we've all faced some kind of discrimination, all faced some kind of marginalization, and we're just, it's a sense of resistance, like it's a sense of kind of like, you have like this kind of very sort of clearly structured heteronormative society where there are certain people on the top and we're ground underneath, but they have no fucking idea what this is like. And that's kind of, and that's the sort of the draw. I found that to be kind of one of the most interesting things that we've been told. By the way, I've been rambling on, I just want to also say, like I said, we're a nationwide service. The service is at the groups that we run on Zoom. Anyone who's experienced sexual violence and also been involved in Chems can access them, like male, trans, and non-binary clients. And yeah, anyone who wants to come and have a chat, make any kind of referrals for anyone they think would benefit from the service, let me know.
Just to correct, I didn't say everyone was good at sex. I did just say it's one of the only areas we're allowed to excel. The door was open, not everybody gets to walk through it. Who was it? Are we all right to continue? I feel like these are really nice. Are we good? We're going over into lunch. I'm sorry about that, guys. So I've got one over here. Have I got anyone closer to me? I like this. It's very town hall vibe, isn't it? Very town hall vibe. Do you want to do it? Do you want to add? The boss is calling it. Sorry.
So I just want to, what Richard was saying, I think is so important, and Ed, like how we, so I'm Duncan from We Are Survivors, how we started this conversation with George House Trust was about why. That's kind of where it started from, and it started from, effectively, I got offered some money from the Ministry of Justice to kind of look at what are the areas, particularly around male sexual violence, and nobody was kind of having those conversations, and it kind of started with Stephen Port. And I just want to kind of support what Shazza was saying before, because what people have kind of forgotten about is the way that drugs were being used by Port for those 4 lads. And it wasn't just, here, have some of this. There was a spiking element. Stephen Port mixed G with lubricant, for instance, and then made up this big story about this was special lube. Well, nobody was talking about that, so kind of people were coming along like, well, okay then. And, you know, for Gabriel and for the 3 other lads that were murdered, let's be really clear, were murdered by Stephen Port. I think we owe it to them to have these really important conversations. And as I said at the very beginning, it's really important that we don't kind of get a bit too Debbie Downer on it all, and we kind of say, you know, this is all bad, and, you know, because it's not. However, let's get fucking serious and say, we need to stop pretending that this is, in some way, shape or form, this is kind of something that happens to somebody else. It doesn't, it happens to us all, and it's really important that we don't forget that. Yes, let's have some fun and let's do what we need to do, but let's also recognise the really serious side of this as well.
Maybe a question for Paul. I'm from our room in Manchester. We support male, trans and binary sex workers. And a lot of the people we support use Chems and say that they want to access help for it. We find it really hard compared to people who want to access other support for other substances or alcohol to get people to the door of the Reach Clinic. There's something different about chemsex that people really struggle to get to that point of support. What more do you think we can do as a support service to get people to your service? I guess kind of a question for Shazza as well, like what could someone have said to you at that time or done to you at that time that would make it easier for you to get to something like the Reach?
for me, like whenever I get, because I'm very open about my drug use, especially when I started drag, so I always get like some of the younger queens coming to me asking how I got off it, and I always say it's because I wanted to. If you don't deep down want to, if there's still that little feeling of next weekend I might just have a dabble, you're not going to quit. You have to want to quit. It has definitely got to come from you. And as much as you signpost them to a service, it has still got to come to them, from them, to actually use the service as well. So there's only so much you can do with that. They've got to do some of the work as well.
Thank you. There's only so much money for a reach practitioner. We've had funding in place for a part-time practitioner with the NHS and local authority. Things have dragged their feet and this, that and the other. The ideal would be that we would be able to come out to you as we have in the past. We'd have conversations, familiarisation of the approaches to take, conversations to kind of entice people into, again, having those conversations with a specialist chemsex practitioner, if that's myself or somebody else that maybe LGBT. So we've got the funding agreed again. There's talks with a neighbouring kind of city and town to be able to kind of bolster that up. For me, there should be a team, and there is kind of conversations at a strategic level, how we can kind of GM-wide act in a collective way and take a collective approach to support people coming to services, not necessarily to the front door of services, but like you said, to the kind of services that surround maybe the primary services, saying I'm participating in these activities, and that the kind of situations we know people, there are problems associated with the chemsex activities. So I think it's just more resources, and that's got to be the bottom line, and commissioners need to buy into that.
I think I'd add to that. There is a huge cost to when the harms of chemsex escalate. There is the human cost that we've heard very much about, but it's kind of very hard to quantify. I just want to sort of reflect to us that actually Manchester is not doing well at early intervention. If you compare to, say, a city like Berlin, that actually has very similar kind of social circumstances, very similar scene. A friend of mine was having problems and actually managed to access early support. He got intensive psychosexual therapy within weeks that lasted 6 months, and he could re-sign up for it. He then went into inpatient rehab. That was not difficult for him to access. There were spaces. He got into that rehab, I think, within a couple of days. And I've seen that repeatedly in Berlin, where the services actually fucking respond and exist. Now, I would say we are already spending the money. If you end up in A&E, that is vastly expensive. You end up in ICU, even more so. You stick a 0 on the end, maybe 2 zeros. We are spending the money, and we're also seeing the human cost. And I would be one of the first people to say, "Oh, drugs are fun; they are nice to have." But we are spending the money, but in very bad places. And I would absolutely advocate for a team approach and also pathways in that people can get early intervention. And I really don't think we're doing. And it's not an individual criticism at all. You're absolutely right. The money's there to expand, and it's bureaucracy that's causing problems for it. We are not doing that well in Manchester. We could do a lot better, and people are getting the help way too late, way too expensive methods.
So I'm a clinical psychologist, but I used to work within a drug and alcohol service. When we were looking at how to support people using Chems in a way that was culturally considerate, and it was just the most difficult back and forth, thinking about like the understanding of staff. Is it a safe space? Is the resources there? What do we do? Like Chapman Barking, it'd be one of the only rehabs in the whole of the city. Is just what do you do? And so we tried to do a project which was like service user level involvement from sort of bottom up, interviewing people. I think you, but I just came up against like barrier after barrier, and I didn't know where to start. And I think, what would you guys think is a good place to start moving forward in other services? This is a massive question. Moving forward in other services, like where to start? Like, do we start with the whole team approach? Do we start with training? Is it a case of funding? It's just about moving forward into other services, I want to take this learning and keep this part of the conversation. Where do you think would be a good place to start? Where is a big barrier to people accessing services that they need? But it's a massive question.
So just before I was a drag queen, I actually worked in Manchester Met University. I was a student advisor there, and I think that is definitely where you need to start. Is this city is massive for students. I also worked at Bar Pop for 5 years. I was DJing there when working on the door, so I'd watch an influx of students come in every September, and then you'd have the odd few that by the time it's getting to April, these students are now gone. They're, they're using drugs, they're using crystal meth, and then they'll disappear and you don't really see them again, I presume, because they've gone home. And again, the next September, you'll see a nice fresh batch of students. A few months later, you've got the odd few that are now got the gaunt faces and, the bags under their eyes. And it's not just through studying, a lot of them are getting into this sex scene and doing crystal meth. That's a big one, and the cat.
Great to see you here again. When I first came on board, the Reach clinic that I deliver across Manchester now on different bases was delivered out of one base, one particular evening, afternoon, a week. And when I came on board, it just didn't feel enough based on where people were coming from, or expected to come from across Manchester to come to that kind of that space. And the DNA rate was really high at 50-51%, whatever. So I moved out to a base in North Manchester and started developing kind of connections with that team and started familiarising them in the conversations rather than just kind of recognising that when someone says, I'm involved in chemsex, that, okay, there's a problem, you've got a drug problem, and that was the kind of perception that I got people's level of understanding of that don't actually understand what chemsex is. So I then did the same thing over in a base in South Manchester, and now we run across 3 bases, so North, Central and South, over 4 days a week, and we run around about 9 or 10 clinics. The DNA rate is around about 7 or 10%, it's just absolutely gone down because we're doing it the right way. We're going to where people need us to be and familiarising teams around the approaches to take and the language to use around chemsex situations, and getting the thinking away from chemsex just being a drug and alcohol issue. It's absolutely not. I'm in a conversation with a sister service at the moment, trying to kind of educate them that you're trying to set up a chemsex service in a place where you've got a whole team of staff who are not exposed enough to have the conversations enough to become culturally competent around engaging people around chemsex situations. And unless it's kind of taken out that base, you're just going to have the same issues, which is non-engagement and unsuccessful kind of journeys into detox and rehab. So it needs to be in a setting that is going to be where people are coming to, such as sexual health clinics, and also familiarisation with those teams needs to happen so that when they are exposed, and they will, because people will come knowing that it's in a safe space, psychologically safe space, to start having those conversations with people that aren't just going to say, you've got a drug and alcohol problem. It's not just a drug and alcohol problem, it really isn't. Chemsex is so much more far-reaching. So the exposure, and I think you encountered this, the exposure is so important. We did a piece of work with Rob Rouse from Manchester University when we set up the chemsafe.space website in Manchester, because there was no digital offer for chemsex-related resources in Manchester. When I came on board and saw that, I thought, what? We've got such a massive community of people involved in chemsex-related activities. We haven't got a digital space. Where are we? So we worked with Manchester University for them to be able to do the research and engage with around about 70 people participating in chemsex-related activities to inform how that was shaped up. So that chemsafe.space website now is shaped up by people who have lived and are living those lives, and that's the really important thing. There's no assumptions made for when someone says, I'm involved in chemsex-related activities, what does that mean? And we talked about it earlier, what does that mean to you and for you, and not making those assumptions.
So we've eaten into the lunch, if you'll excuse the pun. That was as good as my humour gets, I apologise. But before we go, I'm just going to pass briefly over to the lovely Daniel, who has a small announcement to make.
So,
Shazza, did you really think On It was going to let you celebrate 10 years without it going unnoticed? So I'm sure everyone, if you please join me, where's our gainer? There we go. Shazza is one of our original queens from On It, who really kind of jumped with both feet into the campaign, walked Pride with us last year, has recently been raising money because they've been doing Dry January for We Are Survivors and the organisation, which we really appreciate and thank you. You're probably going to have a huge hangover tomorrow when you kind of break your Dry January, but yeah. Thank you so much, and here's to the kind of the next 10 years.
Thank you so much for being with us for this part. We're not over yet. We've got 2 more sessions coming up this afternoon. But starting this conversation is so important, whether you're on it or whether you're wanting to get off it. It's just so important that we talk about the complex stuff, the stuff that makes us uncomfortable, because you know what? It is our bodies and it is our choice, so we should understand everything about it, including all of the implications to ourselves and each other. Please give a round of applause for the wonderful Paul. Who did come out today as a heterosexual man? And yet still said animal bombing. And so I'm so proud of you, Paul, and that's why you'll always be welcome here. The wonderful Maurice, whose research is available online to download for free, because that's what we real true people do. And of course, my amazing dear friend and sister, Shazza Phoenix.